Welcome to Blackbird Writers Presents. I am Tracey Phillips, and today I'm going to be talking with Kathleen Ernst. Kathleen is a historian and educator and a Wisconsin author of more than 40 books. When she's not seated behind her writing desk, which I imagine is all the time, you can find her leading classes about female immigrants, Pomeranian culture, and Wisconsin history. Please welcome Kathleen.
Thank you
Hi.
so much. Delight to be here.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you. And I have to thank my neighbor for handing me
Oh,
your book to read.
yeah,
So,
I just turned in the third in that series. Yeah, that's the first. So,
how awesome. Well, and this is the one where your character comes to America.
yes, yes,
Yeah,
the Hanneke Bauer mysteries.
yeah. So you're a poet and a children's book author and a historical fiction author. And I want to talk about all of it. But but first let's talk about these books, the Hanneke Bauer series, published by Level Best Books, and Lies of Omission. Hanneke comes to America, taking a long journey across the ocean, to finally join Fridolin, a fellow that she knew for a very brief time and married.
Yeah.
So what's your inspiration for Hanneke?
There are a couple of things. In the 1980s and early 90s, I worked at a historic site called Old World, Wisconsin. I was first an interpreter and then I became a curator. And I happened to spend the first couple of years a fair amount of time in an old German house, and it's a really, really cool house. And by the time that period was over, I had thought I want to write a book that was set in this kind of house. I learned so much about early Pomeranian immigrants. Pomerania doesn't exist anymore, but it used to be part of Germany and it's now part of Poland. And it wasn't before there was a single Germany, there were all these different regions, but up by the Baltic Sea. So I was fascinated with that. Um, and I just really wanted to write a story where I could feature that house. So Hanneke's house is the house that's been restored at Old World, Wisconsin. The other thing that sort of captured my imagination is some years back, I read, I believe, a Norwegian account where a woman brought her children to the New World to meet up with her husband, and she'd gotten all the way. She was maybe a mile or so away from the farm in a wagon with her kids, and happened to meet a neighbor of her husband's traveling the other way, and he told her that he had recently died. Her husband had recently died. And it had stayed with me. What would it feel like to get to the New World and you don't have friends and you don't speak the language, and you're counting on your husband to support you, at least in part, and abruptly you find out he's gone. So that's not quite the same situation that I put Hanneke in, but it's in the big picture, it's the same. Hanneke gets to Wisconsin and she learns that her husband is dead and no one wants her there, and she's not sure how she's going to survive, but she makes it.
Yeah, well, and she can't even really prove that they married.
Right. Yeah, she has her papers are stolen, and it would in 1855 it took a very long time to write back to the old country and ask for copies of her wedding papers.
I would imagine a very long time.
Yeah, very long time, months and months. So she really was in a pickle, to use an old-fashioned word, and the deputy sheriff that she encounters right away ordered her to leave town, and her husband's sister didn't believe that she was his wife, and she hadn't known that he had a sister. So it was a problem for
A
her.
situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Hanneke establishes herself right away as a very strong person. And she's dedicated to finding out what happened to Fridolin. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, she doesn't believe what people are telling her, and she feels that she owes it to him, even though they'd only known each other a very short time. She was quite fond of him and committed to him, and felt that she owed it to him and herself to find out if there was more to the story than it seemed. And of course there
Yeah.
was.
Right. Well, it's because he had an accident in the barn,
Right.
right?
He was in the barn and he was found, and everyone assumed that he had accidentally killed himself with a tool. And she just didn't think he was quite that inept.
That klutzy, yeah.
Yeah, that klutzy. Yeah. So against everyone's wishes, she decided to find out the truth for herself. And by good fortune, she found a place to stay at a tavern, and she gets her feet on the ground in this book and discovers the truth behind his death.
Yeah. Is it hard to balance our perception of, strong women today versus, you know, what it took to, for women to be seen and heard and all of that back then? How do you balance the actual,
It
history?
Yeah, it can be tricky. Um, because you do want a strong woman if your main character is a woman, and Hanneke is strong. She's progressive, certainly, and she's on her own, so she has to do things that will help her survive. But I do try to still keep a touch of that the period restraints in there, what she can and can't do, what people, and of course, one of the tensions is that people don't expect her to do much of anything, and she's too strong for that. So, um,
And
and
she
as
gets her nose in everybody's business and they're like,
Right. And as the series goes on, the deputy sheriff who ordered her to leave town ends up relying on her, because she can find out some kinds of information that he can't. So even when this case is solved, she goes on to have a meaningful sideline with him.
yeah. Um, so I know that you've been a history buff for a good part of your writing career. And you've also written some nonfiction books, The Settler's Year and Too Afraid to Cry. And those are about real life experiences during difficult times as well. What draws you to those time periods and to, I don't know, thinking about how people deal with those situations?
Um, Partly because they're so inspirational. You can't read some of these early accounts of people without just developing a great admiration for what they endured and what they accomplished. But I've always loved historical fiction. My mom was a librarian and she used to bring books home, and I grew up on the East Coast and we used to visit, places like Williamsburg or Plymouth Plantation, but we'd read books that were set there. So by the time I got there, they were very alive in my mind. And obviously that made a big impression on me. I wanted to share with other readers some of the joy that I take in visiting historic sites and old places and imagining the people who are long gone. It's a
Yeah.
it's a real passion of mine.
Talk a little bit about those two books because they're from different time periods and I didn't write it down. So,
Oh,
uh,
that's okay. Um, I grew up in Maryland, and as a young child, I used to spend a lot of time in Western Maryland where the Civil War battles were fought, where some Civil War battles were fought. And I'd take tours, and the guides would talk about this regiment and that unit. And I'd say, yeah, but what happened to the people that lived in that house over there? And at that time, there really was not much. And when I talked to some park staff, I was told, oh, you're not going to find anything about civilians. but that's really what I was interested in. And I spent 12 years on Too Afraid to Cry. Too Afraid to Cry is a quote from a child who had spent the Battle of Antietam in the cellar, and then her mother took her out with a basket of provisions as soon as the firing shot, and she was describing that moment. It's just when the firing had stopped, but they crept out into this world that was just unrecognizable and horrific, and she was just a child. So Too Afraid to Cry is set during the Civil War years. It focuses primarily on 1862 because that's when the Battle of Antietam was, but it also covers before and after, because the armies just moved through and through and through in Western Maryland. And then A Settler's Year, I did much more recently, and that's also that is about immigrants. I developed a deep passion for immigrant stories when I worked at Old World Wisconsin, which is basically an immigration museum. It's talking about life for people when they came. And I was asked to do that book, and it's an accounting of the very first year, which everyone seemed to agree is if you could get through the first year, you'd be okay. But that first year was a corker.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah, so there was an abundance of sources, and I found it fascinating.
Yeah, wonderful. Um, uh, Going back to the Hanneke's book, Friedel Hanneke is the deceased husband is involved in a group called the Know Nothing movement, and he's also involved. She finds out later in the Underground Railroad. Yeah. So I think anti-foreigners, right, fueled the Know
Well, he
Nothing.
was, yeah, and he wasn't one of them, but he was fighting them. The Know Nothings was a political movement. It didn't start in Wisconsin, but some of it pretty quickly dribbled over state borders. And Hanukkah arrives in 1855, which was the zenith of nothing energy right in there. And there were some Know Nothing newspapers and activities in Wisconsin, just not quite on the scale that there were in some other states. But Hanukkah arrives right in the middle of this. She thinks she's come to find a new, peaceful home. That's all she really wants, is to run Friedelin's farm with him, have a family, settle down, and it doesn't work that way, because not only is Friedelin gone, but he had been having to contend with Know Nothings, who didn't want him there. There were so many immigrants arriving in vast numbers that some Yankees got overwhelmed, scared, worried, and they paraded in the streets and they tried to intimidate people, and in other places it did get violent. We don't know of too much violence in Wisconsin. But this is what Hanukkah found when she got here, thinking that America was this great place, and then finding out that a lot of people were very vocal and didn't want her, and others from her homeland in Watertown. The Watertown area is where the book is set.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting that, I mean, I guess it didn't occur to me that there would be such a strong opinion of, immigration back then, when it seems like just everybody came to America and we all became, happy living here.
Yeah, it wasn't quite that simple.
But it's different, and to think now with the things that are going on across the southern border. And anyway, so I thought it was a very timely discussion, and
I
it's
didn't plan it that way. I actually written the first draft years before I got back and finished it and published it, but yeah, it was very, very timely, and a lot of reflection of what's going on now and what was going on in 1850. Some things haven't really changed.
yeah, I know, that's surprising in a lot of ways, I think. So do you do research while you're writing, or how do you just you've done so much research it just like pours out onto the pages?
I wish. Um, I certainly have, a lot of experience, 35 years of experience of reading immigrant accounts to the upper Midwest. Um, but whenever I start a new series or a new book, I do have to do a lot of research, and I do that before I even begin. Um, and then I don't outline. I think about where I want to begin and go from there. And invariably I find out, oh, I better look that up. And then I go learn about
Hmm.
something new. I was not very familiar with know nothings before I wrote this book.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's fascinating for me. Even though I knew this period very well, there was, like any other time period, there was a great deal going on culturally and politically and socially. And it's been fun to explore that.
Yeah. And you are no stranger to writing mysteries, apparently, because your other series, the Chloe Ellefson
Mhm.
mysteries, I have 11 books.
Yeah, and I just started working on number 12 recently. It will continue. I took a break to work on Hanukkah, but my other series is called the Chloe Ellefson Mysteries. And Chloe Ellefson has a job at Old World, Wisconsin, very similar to the job that I had. So it's a very different
Kind.
situation. A
Yeah.
lot of things I can pull out of my brain. The book is set in the 1980s because that's the period I know, and a lot of things have changed. And I didn't want her. Um, I wanted to give her more challenges than just whipping out her cell phone to call for help or things like that. So Chloe is a curator, and she doesn't want to be. She's not Miss Marple. She doesn't want to be a sleuth. But her knowledge of history is always needed to solve a contemporary crime, contemporary to her area. And most of the books take place at different historic sites and museums. So that's fun too. It's always something new.
Are those all set in Wisconsin as well?
They're all, most of them are set in Wisconsin and some in surrounding areas. There's one set in Michigan, one in Minnesota, one in Iowa, and then there's one that visits the Laura Ingalls Wilder sites, and that they're all over as you're heading west. But Laura ended up in South Dakota with her family. So
Oh, very cool.
yeah, so Chloe goes too with her sister.
And you're working on book 12, which is called.
I don't even have a title for it
Oh,
yet. I started it, and then I was asked to write 3 Hanneke Bauer books. I thought I was only going to write one at first, and that's fine. I was thrilled. But Chloe's been on hiatus for a little while, so now I've only gotten a little bit done, but I had to put it aside, and now I'm going to be back to working on an adventure for Chloe.
cool.
Yeah.
Um, and so aside from all those books, you also used to write children's books for the American Girl.
I wrote 20 titles for American Girl. Yeah. Over
I
the,
remember each doll had its own like books and character, and like they had these elaborate, histories that came with them.
the only full character that I created was Caroline, who was set during the War of 1812.
Hmm.
Then I also wrote mysteries, quite a few mysteries for them. Yeah.
Oh, cool. And so this month you are teaching a course through the Wisconsin Writing Group right on Door County, and the workshop is called Beguiling Your Readers. Can you tell us a little bit about what the class is going to be?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Up in Door County as you said, right on doorcounty.org. You can find more information about it. But when I was thinking about topics, as you well know, we don't have, as authors, a lot of time to catch the interests of our readers. There's just so much out there, and attention spans are so short. So the class is going to focus on that, about what needs to be covered in the first chapter, or hopefully the first scene of a book or a story, and how to grab your readers and pull them in right away. Excited about that.
Cool. And what's the date for that? Because I hope that this video is going to go up before then.
That will be, let's see. I should know that
I
off
don't
the
know why
top.
I have the 20th in my mind. I don't know if that's right or not.
No, it's after that, I think.
Okay.
Let's see. Because I'm going to be in residence up there, basically the first week of February, and I don't have it written on my calendar.
Well, readers can, or viewers can find that by going to the Right on Door County website. Yeah. And we'll make sure this goes up before then.
Okay, it's if you're not familiar with it, they have a wonderful writing center there.
Mhm.
So picture yourself all cozy and by the fire as we talk about stories. It's a wonderful place to go.
Yeah, I get their newsletter and I highly recommend it. They have lots of activities and fun things for young people as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So we know what you're working on now. And is there anything that you want to talk about that I haven't asked?
I don't think so. I'm actually working on two stories now. A couple years ago, I had the great good fortune of being a resident at a national park for a month, and I've always intended to write a book based on the history of that park. So that I'm going to balance that one and Chloe in the coming months.
Oh,
So
great.
always stuff going on.
Always stuff going on. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been a pleasure talking to you about your
A great
books.
pleasure. Yeah.
And where can our readers and viewers find you if they want to reach out?
KathleenErnst.com, and it's Kathleen with a K, and Ernst is ERNST. So that will get you to my website, and from there, you can hop over to my blog if you'd like. I'm also very active on Facebook. So you can look for me at Kathleen Ernst Author, and you'll find me.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tracy.
Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.